welcome again. So welcome back to Lab at Home with the Museum of Life and Science. My name is Peregrine, and I am so excited to introduce my special guest who I have here with us. But first, I wanted to invite all of you to be a part of our program by contributing your thoughts and questions and ideas to our moderated chat box, because we do have Catalyst Volunteer Caroline with here today to moderate. I would love to go ahead and introduce my friend here. I am so excited to be here and doing a scientist spotlight on my friend, Dr. Becca Peixotto, who is an archaeologist. And she does so many amazing things. She is actually a hero of mine, and I would love for her to maybe tell you a little bit more about what she does.
Hi, everybody. My name is Becca. I'm Dr. Becca Peixotto, and like Peregrine said, I'm an archaeologist. Archaeology is the study of our human past. So archaeologists excavate, we dig to find things that people in the past left behind. Sometimes that's really big things, like maybe the foundation of a building. Sometimes it's really small things like maybe beads or pieces of stone tools. And we use all of that information to help us understand and tell stories about people in the past. Hopefully you can see on your screen there a picture of a whole bunch of people standing doing things in a square hole in a field. And this is what an archaeology site often looks like. In that particular picture, we are excavating a site from the 1600s in Maryland. And we dig in square holes because we're scientists and we want to keep really careful track of the things that we find and where they came from. And rather than just sort of plunking our shovels down wherever, we use a grid and we're very careful about how we dig things. And you can see sort of down in the lower, what is that, the lower left-hand corner, there are some people standing next to screens, next to these wooden things that they're staring down at. And that's where we sift the soil to see if we're missing any artifacts, because sometimes we find things as we're digging, and sometimes there's small things that we only find when we put this dirt through a sifter. So this is what some archaeology sites look like. But sometimes I'm working in other places. One of the places I've worked is in the Great Dismal Swamp, which actually extends into North Carolina. It goes from Southern Virginia, just about Norfolk, Virginia, down to almost Elizabeth City, North Carolina. So it's sort of in your neighborhood. And that's a swamp, and it's a hard place to get into to find the archaeology sites. The vegetation's really thick, lots of plants that have stickers and things that want to scratch you as you're walking through, and there's snakes and bears and lots of water. And then there's these little islands, and on those little islands, that's where we do our excavations. And then if you look on the opposite corner where I'm not wearing the red bandana, where I'm wearing a blue jumpsuit, there I am 30 meters underground in a cave in South Africa, also doing archaeology. And that's a really old site. We were looking for bones of an ancient human relative there.
As an archaeologist, right, you explore the past, and you explore the past through the stuff that we humans leave behind during and after our lives. So I'm wondering if we have any ideas, you can put it in the chat. What kinds of objects do people leave behind?
Oh, I look forward to seeing what people write in the chat.
Yeah, and Becca, I might even ask you, what kind of objects can tell us about how people lived in the past?
Yeah, I see that Wade has suggested jewelry as something that we might find. And we do sometimes find things that were items of personal adornment. So pendants or beads, depending on the kind of site we are, we might find lots of beads. And those can tell us something about the kinds of things that maybe people held really dear, things that they thought were very special. Some of the other things we find, though, are more like everyday objects. You know, if I go into my kitchen, I have a whole drawer full of Tupperware containers for storing food or storing water or whatever in. And if I go to an archaeology site that's, say, about 1,000 years old, I might find a whole bunch of pieces of ceramic pots that might not be very fancy looking, but they were sort of the Tupperware for the people that used to live there. So it's those everyday objects that can also tell us, and we might be able to get information from the pots. How big were they? What kinds of things were they storing in them? Sometimes you can do chemical analyses and see what was in the pot. or was it a cooking pot or a storage pot? So it's the fancy stuff like jewelry, but then the everyday stuff like the tools and the and containers and things like that.
I never thought about ancient Tupperware. That's a funny way of thinking about it. Sometimes something that I think would be really useful for learning about people would be maybe like the stuff that they throw away, their garbage.
Yes. Yeah. That's, that's something that a lot of archaeologists are thinking about now, especially with us being in the pandemic times right now, and all of those masks that get discarded when we're done with them. I imagine that in 100 years, an archaeologist is going to find a landfill and they're going to see this sudden layer of masks that would help them know that that was the time that was the layer in the landfill when it was the pandemic times. And before that, you're not going to see so many masks, and hopefully after you won't see so many masks. And so we can do that also with things in the past. Sometimes we can get it to seasons. If we're seeing a particular kind of animal bones, a lot that they've thrown out from dinner in a trash pit of the past, we might know what season it was, or maybe how it was butchered, who was living there. So there's lots of parallels we can take from what happens now to help us understand the past, and vice versa.
So, the people of the past can't maybe necessarily tell us what their lives were like, but we can learn so much from objects like this. This is really cool. Well, I wanted to give my friends here a challenge to do along with this, or if you want to kind of check out how we're doing it and do it yourself later. Our activity later on in the program is going to need some artifacts, some stuff that could give people clues about us. So what I want all of you to do is I want you to use your paper and your drawing utensil that we suggested you have, and I want you to draw a few small pictures, just one or two, of some objects in your life that a future archaeologist might find if they dug you up. I'll show you what I drew. I just drew some things that I have with me in my everyday life, and it's my glasses and it's my computer. I have my computer with me almost every day. So if you want to just kind of draw in two little items, they don't have to be too large, and we're going to be cutting them out a little bit later. So that is my challenge for you. And while you are doing that, I'm hoping to ask some questions of you, Dr. Peixotto. You have done work that has inspired me, and I'm wondering what may have inspired you to do the work that you do.
Yeah. Wow. So I didn't know when I was growing up that archaeology was a thing you could do for a job. I loved going to museums, and I knew about archaeologists, but I never met one, and I didn't know that real people could be archaeologists. So I never even considered it as a career until I was already an adult. But then I always have enjoyed history. I always have enjoyed being outdoors and getting dirty, digging in the dirt. And I've always enjoyed science. And so archaeology is the place that, for me, all three of those things meet. And also, you said that people of the past can't necessarily tell us what their lives were like, but we can learn about it from the things they left behind. When we read our history books, we get part of the picture of what was going on in the past. And then we can use archaeology to expand that picture and tell us more about not just the famous people, but the everyday people as well. So that's one of the things that I really love about archaeology, and I find really inspiring is, we sort of know what the big historical events are, but we don't know who was there, who was cleaning up after that big event, and what was their life like. And so that's something that archaeology helps us understand.
Yeah, it kind of gives you another side of the story. I really like that. Whenever we talk to scientists, I always want to ask them about their successes and about their failures, because both are such an important part of the scientific process. I'm wondering, can you tell us something related to your work that you feel proud of, and then maybe a time that things didn't exactly go as planned?
Sure. Well, there's lots of times where things don't go as planned.
In here.
And I've learned to embrace that as a, especially in science, as a learning opportunity. When your experiment or your idea doesn't work, well, now you know, and now you can try something different. So some of the things that I'm really proud of are I found some archaeology sites in the Great Dismal Swamp that are places where maroon communities, so people who were enslaved that left on their own so they could be free. I found some places where they lived, and it's really helping us to understand sort of what their lives were like. And I'm also pretty proud of the work I've done in South Africa too, because I've gotten to work with a fantastic team there. And then, yeah, some of those learning opportunities, those failures, gosh, I was in the, this is kind of a silly story. I was in the Great Dismal Swamp, and it's hard to navigate your way around there because, there's trees everywhere and you can't really see where you're going very often. So I found what I thought was going to be a shortcut passing through one of the canals, and the canal turned out to be a whole lot deeper than I thought it was going to be, and it was really hard to wade across, and that was kind of scary, and it took actually more time than if I just walked around like I was supposed to. So yeah, we sometimes you think you're on the right track, and you have to realize that there's other ways to do things, particularly when you're out in the field, but anytime you're doing science.
If some of us are interested in doing the kinds of things that you do, how could we get started? Do you have any advice for us?
Yeah. One of the things I love about being in the region where your museum is that all of the states up and down the seaboard there have state archaeology societies. And you can contact the State Archaeology Society. They probably have a local chapter in your area, and they often open up excavations to the general public. Sometimes they'll do archaeology camps for kids. Sometimes they'll just have an excavation and they'll have public days where you can go and try it out and meet some archaeologists. And as an archaeologist, it's really fun when people who are interested come and try it out. And as somebody, as somebody who might be interested, it's a good chance to get your hands dirty and meet some folks and see what archaeology is all about, and also learn about archaeology in your local area. So I would strongly recommend finding your local archaeology society.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have the Office of State Archaeology is right in Raleigh. That's great advice. The work that you've done. Can you kind of tell us about your major expeditions? We've mentioned them here and there, or excavations. Do you think you could give us a rundown of some of the cool stuff that you've done?
Sure. Let's see. So I'll show you some more pictures here, if that's okay.
I'd love to see them.
This is a picture I showed you before, and here on the left, that's working in the Great Dismal Swamp, the left in the opposite corner there. And then on the right-hand side, this is in the cave, and that's the team I work with in the cave in South Africa. And so this next slide shows in South Africa where we've worked, in the cradle of humankind, and it's an area that's really well known for finding bones of our most ancient human relatives, right? They're fossilized bones. And so we go down into this cave, and there's a whole bunch of fossils there that nobody had ever seen before, and we got to excavate them, but it's pretty tricky working. You can see in that picture I'm laying on a ladder that's horizontal, and I'm laying down so that I don't smoosh anything by sitting on it, right? And here's some of the tools that we use to do that work, and also to do the work above ground too. Little dustpans and signs that we can write on and wipe off to record things when we're taking pictures, toothpicks and paintbrushes, bubble wrap and bags to protect the things that we find. And we're always doing kind of measuring and recording to keep really good track. And there you can see my friend Kenny, who's working on some excavation in the cave. And in that situation, we're actually using toothpicks to dig things up. It's very, very slow going. But we also use underground and above ground. We use some high-tech equipment too. And you can see there on that farthest right picture, they're using a laser scanner to do that work. And so we've got great pictures of the cave work, but I don't have a whole lot of great pictures in the swamp because I go there with a much smaller team. So it's either I'm taking pictures or I'm doing something, and I can't do both at the same time. But the swamp work is really special to me. because it's where I did my PhD research and my master's research. So I've been working in the Dismal Swamp since about 2011. The guy that looks a little bit like Indiana Jones in this picture up on the right-hand side with the beard and the hat and the vest, that's a man called Dan Sayers. He's a professor at American University, and he's one of the people that really got this archaeology of the Dismal Swamp going. And I was lucky to join a project with him. And like I said, we're looking for communities of people who never had their stories recorded. They're people who were pushed to the margins of society because of the color of their skin and where they came from. And they lived under really horrible conditions when they were enslaved. And some of those people chose to leave or tried to leave, and they found a place in the Great Dismal Swamp where they could not be enslaved, but not exactly be 100% free because they couldn't leave the swamp either. So we do archaeology in the swamp to understand who they were and what their lives were like. And, you know, we don't get to read a whole bunch about them in our history books, but it's a really inspiring story of people, resisting and going against what was expected of them to live the lives they wanted to live.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things we would not, as you said, we wouldn't find that in the history books. So it's amazing to be able to find the stuff and the remnants of that amazing story that's there. Something that I love about your work, Becca, is you love getting into difficult to reach places. And maybe I'll get to ask you about that a little bit later. But it's difficult to get into the Great Dismal Swamp. It's difficult to navigate because it's so muggy and buggy, and sometimes you step in the wrong places and end up submerged. And then the Dinaledi cave in South Africa, that's incredibly hard to get to as well, right?
Yes, it is. In order to get into the place where we find the fossils in that cave, we're 30 meters underground, and it's not just straight 30 meters down, it's a winding route. And there's a spot that's 11 centimeters wide, so it's a little bit longer than a dollar bill, that you have to squeeze through to get there. It's not a round, it's like this, it's a long slot, but you still have to go straight down it. So that's a limiting factor as far as who's willing to squeeze themselves through that and who can. So it's a cool place to go. It's a really beautiful cave. There are stalactites and stalagmites, and there's bats, and it's just really beautiful underground.
Wow, we have a friend who made an interesting connection in the chat asking, is it like Minecraft? I imagine it is a little bit like that, digging under there, kind of seeing an entire new world that's under the surface.
Yeah.
Wow. We have learned a little bit more about the amazing stuff that you do, Dr. Peixotto. I'm wondering if we might do a little activity together here fairly quickly to help us understand maybe the mindset of an archaeologist, to help us get into the head of an archaeologist.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, we started a little bit earlier. We started it by drawing some little pictures of artifacts, something that would tell people about our lives. I drew my glasses, and I drew my computer. And then I cut those out. And there's a few other supplies that you might do if you're doing it along with us, or if you're gonna check it out after the program. I'd love to switch really quickly to my experiment cam to show you the supplies that I have. So what we're doing is we're gonna be creating an archaeological site, maybe a little bit like the ones that you have explored, Dr. Peixotto, in a bottle. So you'll need a clear bottle. Mine's glass, but yours doesn't have to be. We want it to be fairly small so that we don't have to use a lot of things to fill it up. And then we're going to need a spoon. We're going to need something like a chopstick or a skewer or something like that. That's just going to be for shoving things down inside of here. We're going to need paper to draw on with our drawing material. We're going to need scissors to cut out. We're also going to need some paper to create kind of a funnel to get stuff in here. And finally, we're going to need the stuff to put in there. So you need some dirt and some other kinds of natural materials. So I have some little bits of grass here, some little leaves, and then this is stretching the definition of natural materials a little bit. I have some yellow lentils, and I have some little crushed nuts, and I think that's going to help us kind of think about these different ideas. When we're thinking about an archaeological dig, Dr. Peixotto, why is it that we have to dig for stuff?
Yeah. Because things get buried over time, right? Even if we just leave something out, out in the environment, eventually over hundreds and hundreds of years, it's going to get buried under new dirt. Leaves fall, become dirt, and layers will build up. And so we excavate down through all of those layers, and often, usually, the layers are in sort of reverse chronological order. So the newest stuff is on top and the oldest stuff is underneath. And that, we call that in archaeology, we call that stratigraphy. Sometimes the stratigraphy might get mixed up a little because there's, some sort of natural event, or a human comes along with a shovel and mixes it up. But usually we think about them in layers. So I love that you have different color materials there. So you'll be able to build up some really clear to see stratigraphy as you layer your things in there.
Yeah, I hope we'll be able to see it. I was going to see if Caroline, you could put that amazing word in the chat for us, stratigraphy. And I'm going to get started showing us what some stratigraphy might look like. So we're saying things get buried in dirt over time. So I was thinking about the cave that you had been in, Dr. Peixotto, and the narrow entrance. So that's what my bottle is. I'm pretending it's a little cave with a really narrow entrance here. And I want to put some dirt in here. In order to do that, I could just spoon it through the opening, but I'm going to use a little bit of paper to create a funnel, a really simple funnel. And I do that by rolling it up a little bit and then sticking it in here. So I have one that I already taped up earlier. So I have my little funnel here. That's just to make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to start with my ground floor. I'm going to take a little bit of my dirt and I'm going to put it inside of my funnel and have that go inside of my bottle. So this is my long, long time ago ground, and I'm not just going to have dirt in there, right? I'm also going to find, I'm also going to put some stuff on the ground, like some little bits of grass, little bits of leaves. So I'm using my chopstick to help me out here. I'm just creating the ground for a long time ago. But now, Dr. Peixotto, you were saying that that things get buried over time. So if this is the ground a long time ago, we want to come along and add a little bit more of our dirt. I'll go ahead and add that now. So I have another question, Dr. Peixotto. I'm adding a layer of dirt here, and I'm thinking about dirt accumulating over years and years and years into my little pretend cave. But is it just going to be like this for billions of years? Is it just like dirt, grass, dirt, grass, dirt, grass?
It depends what's happening in the environment, what happens with the climate and with the weather. It might just be dirt, grass, dirt, grass, dirt, grass. It might be dirt and some things that aren't grass, big trees. Maybe there's a forest that comes, sort of takes over the meadow through forest succession, and then you end up with the remnants of trees because maybe there's a forest fire. Maybe there are people that come along and live in that meadow or in that forest, and so you'll see where the trees might have been cleared out, and there might be somebody had a fire pit, so you might find the stones they piled up for to make a fire ring. And then maybe there's a flood or some other big natural event, and it makes a different kind of dirt come in, which I think is what you're about to get there with that layer there. Yep. Yeah. And so you might even see that kind of an event. Or if somebody planted, if a field was used for agriculture, things were grown there, it might change the color of the soil. So we might see the evidence of that.
So we'll see evidence in the dirt that's there of different changes. We might see different stuff. Like I'm going to pretend there was a rock slide in my little cave.
There you go.
Here's a rock slide of yellow lentils in my cave. That's going to create a really distinctive layer when more dirt accumulates over it over time. So do fossils form all the time, Dr. Peixotto?
You have to be really lucky to become a fossil. Most things that have bones that, when the animal is done using their bones, when they've died, most of those things decompose. But if you happen to die if you're an animal that has bones and you happen to die in just the right spot where your where your bones get preserved really quickly. Maybe they get covered over in mud really quickly, or they're deep down in a cave where nothing can preserve them. And all the conditions are right for a really, really, really long time. Then your bones might turn into fossils.
So it needs really specific circumstances. One of the ones I've heard about is if there was a volcanic eruption, and if there was a lot of ash that falls down, that ash is something that preserves things really well.
Yes, yeah, it sort of seals them in so that then no other animals can come along and chew on the bones. They're not exposed to the air, so they don't decompose. Yeah, exactly.
So that's sort of like a sort of a Tupperware in itself. I'm going to add a little bit of my crushed peanuts here to represent some ash. Got some light ash here. See if I can get those to go in. I've had a lot of things happen in my landscape over time, for sure. There we go. Had a lot of things happen in my landscape, and you can kind of see over time, it almost looks like a sandwich. There's some different things, some different layers. And I'm going to add one last layer of dirt here before we start involving our own artifacts here. So I've got a pretty good set of layers here, right? I've got my very, very oldest one at the bottom, you said, because according to stratigraphy, oldest stuff is at the bottom. It gets covered up, and it is going to get preserved. In some cases, sometimes by like a blanket of ash, or sometimes there's different objects that get kind of smushed in that dirt. And all of those different layers can tell us about all of those different times. So let's pretend all of this time has passed. And now I want to pretend that all of us have come traveling to this cave, and we've brought some of our most important items with us, some of our everyday items with us. But we managed to accidentally drop our items inside of the cave. I'm going to put my items inside of the cave here. I've accidentally dropped some very, very important items here. I'm going to say that I've lost my items, and they're lost to history now down in that cave.
Wow. Well, first off, I love that you had to squoosh and sort of crumple up your items, because we very rarely as archaeologists find whole things. Usually we're finding fragments of things. So that's a good representation of that. What's the next thing that's going to happen? Well, just like has happened before we visited that cave, maybe more sediment is going to accumulate.
Ooh, all right, so we're gonna get even more dirt in there. Dirt, dirt, and more dirt.
Lots of dirt. Yep. I like working in the garden. I get to play in the dirt even when I'm not being an archaeologist.
And you mentioned too that there's different ways that you dig, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't just necessarily go in with a shovel. You use things like toothpicks sometimes.
Yeah,
right?
sometimes we use a shovel, and sometimes we might use a trowel. And sometimes we might need to use, depending on what we're excavating, we might need to use tools that aren't made of metal, because we're trying not to damage whatever it is we're excavating, especially if we're excavating bone or fossils. We might use toothpicks or like bamboo tools and things like that. So yeah, we use different kinds. Depends if we're trying to dig something really fast that's really big, or if we're working on a very narrow, small object.
I'm going to add one more layer or so on here just to kind of make it distinctive here.
There you go. We also use lots of different technologies to record sites as we're digging. So while we're digging, we might stop and make a 3D model, take some photographs, or do a laser scan to record exactly what the site looks like.
Wow.
So that we can look at it after we've excavated, or share it with people while we're excavating.
That is so cool. Something I think about, thinking about all of the different ways that there are to dig things up and to find out what's down there. You know, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, why can't I just dig, right? Why can't I just take my chopstick if I want to get these items, because I'm a future archaeologist? Why can't I just go in there and dig it all up and fling dirt everywhere and just kind of get down to the stuff that I know is there? Why wouldn't that work?
Yeah. Well, you could do that, but you'd lose a lot of information along the way. If you just saw, like I can see there that one of your objects is peeking up a little bit from the layer of soil that it's in. And if you just went in there and grabbed that thing, then you wouldn't know actually which layer of soil it came from or how deep it went down in the dirt. And if we think about those layers of dirt as being sort of measures of time, then we might not know how old that object is or how it got there. So there's a fancy word in archaeology that's provenience. And that just means knowing where things came from and trying to keep track of where they came from, because knowing where they came from, both in depth and across a site, helps us put the story back together. Like if you if you have provenience, then you can put your jigsaw puzzle together more carefully and more accurately than if you don't know, then you just have a bunch of cool looking stuff. And you don't know the story of how it got there or who made it or anything. So
that's a good point. I might see stuff, I might not even know how cool the stuff is if I don't know its story.
Yeah.
And if I go in and I mess up the book, I mess up the order of the pages, then it wouldn't tell me the story.
There we go. So I've got my layer of dirt, and I think you can see there's some leaves and stuff in there. And then I actually used a layer of salt here and then some more dirt. And like sometimes happens, the layers aren't always perfect. And that's one of the other reasons we have to be really careful when we dig, so we can figure out where the layers aren't perfect, because maybe that's a cool thing. Maybe that's where there was a archaeology dig in the past or something.
Wow. Well, I love salt is such a great idea, Dr. Peixotto. I love that. I love that you made one with us. That is so cool. Wow. So if you have made one, or if you're going to make one, I would say your challenge is now, can we get this stuff out without disturbing the book of stratigraphy that's here? I was hoping to ask you maybe one more question. We've been talking a little bit about kind of difficult to reach places like Dinaledi Cave or like the Great Dismal Swamp. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you choose to go to such difficult places in your career. Aren't there easier sites to excavate? Why do you like the difficult ones?
Yeah, I like the difficult ones because I like having an adventure. I love being outdoors. Before I was an archaeologist, I led wilderness expeditions. So I took kids and adults out into the mountains to go rock climbing or backpacking and that kind of stuff. And I love being outdoors. So I have those skills that I can put toward doing archaeology. And yeah, there's a lot to learn about the places where we don't go all the time.
If they're uncommon places, we don't always go there, then their stories will go untold.
I see that someone has posted in the chat, we can go to our backyard and try to find something. And that's absolutely true, because sometimes we get so caught up in the idea of like going really far away to look for neat stuff, and we miss the really cool stuff that's right in our backyard, like the Great Dismal Swamp. It's right in the backyard of a whole lot of people that live in that part of Virginia and North Carolina, and there's still things to learn there, and we're certainly not done doing archaeology there.
And there may be places in your backyard that are also hard to find and hard to get into. Yeah. So maybe you will be the perfect size, or have the determination to get down into these places and find out some missing chapters of these stories. Great advice from one of my friends. Careful with the gas line, for sure.
Yes, definitely don't dig too deeply in your own backyards.
I have really enjoyed hearing from you about all of the cool work that you've done. I have really appreciated your advice about if any of us are interested in archaeology, what we might be able to do. I've had a lot of fun building a little archaeology site in a bottle, and I'm going to have a fun time puzzling out how to get these. We had a friend in the chat who suggested maybe we could pull them out with some tweezers. That would be interesting.
It's been so much fun. Thank you for inviting me, and it's fun to do the experiment with you, and I loved our conversation. Thanks so much.
For sure. And friends, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of our program as well. We always appreciate hearing from all of you. I hope that we'll see you sometime next month for our next Lab at Home program. You can look on our social media and website to hear more about that next date. But in the meantime, have fun experimenting. I know I will. See you later, my friends. Bye, Dr. Peixotto.
Bye.
See you later, my friends.